Hello, this is Piero Giorgio, author of Survive the Economic Collapse and many other books. Today I'd like to review a fantastic book, the latest book by Graham Hancock. It was out in 2015, I believe, and I only read it last year in 2016. Graham Hancock has been very important for me. When I read his first bestseller, Fingerprints of the God, I read it in 1997, and that book struck me as evidence. He brilliantly explained in that book why he believes strongly in the theory that there has been civilizations way before the usual traditional early civilizations that we put in the Middle East, in the Fertile Crescent of southern Turkey, the Euphrates and Tigris River, and the Indus rivers, and of course Egypt. And that these previous civilizations were destroyed by some sort of cataclysm, and that the survivors of that civilization found ways to send us messages about their existence, or perhaps warnings of what happened to them through megalithic constructions and through some hidden cultural messages hidden within a large construction such as the pyramids of Egypt. That theory was fascinating, and it made me think about why civilizations collapse. In that theory, obviously, it was very much about catastrophic, cataclysmic event. Now, as you know, in my books, I mention some other catastrophic events which are man-made that we are facing today. Now, I've read all of Graham Hancock's books, Underworld, War God. Recently, he wrote some very interesting novels, and I've been following what he has been doing for almost 20 years now. And his recent book, Magicians of the God, is really very interesting, as it basically follows on Fingerprints of the God and Underworld, and gives perhaps updates and certainly new ideas on how this theory perhaps becomes even more and more realistic. And indeed, it makes us travel to Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey, where we have recently discovered a megalithic city which dates way before any other megalithic city that we know of. And this is to be linked with the Sphinx in Egypt, that obviously is much more older than that is considered by traditional Egyptologists. And this has been shown and almost, I think, proven by geologists like Robert Duval and many others. So it is very interesting to see that there is a convergence of a lot of facts that seems to show that there must have been civilizations at least 10,000 or around 8,000 BC, so 10,000 years ago. And that since if these civilizations were able to build Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey, it means that the industrial and agricultural base that enabled enough people to be able to build such buildings was already quite developed, and that therefore pushes agriculture a few thousand years before that we previously thought. And this is just fact, because these buildings are there, and maybe they're even older than that, because it's very hard to date stones. Now, what is very interesting in this book is that it tells us a lot about it intermingles the legends of the civilizations that rose up roughly 10,000 years ago, suddenly in the Middle East, not far from Göbekli Tepe actually, and that we see similarities from these within the legends and myth of those civilizations. And of course, we call in the Western world, we have the myth of Atlantis, which is basically was told to us from the books of Plato. But what is very interesting is that Plato studied in Egypt, And obviously, Egypt is the oldest massive civilizations that we know of. And clearly, there are very interesting theories on what are and what are the pyramids of Gizeh for. They are obviously not tombs. They're not obviously not burial grounds. They're probably much older than traditional Egyptology thinks. But if we look at what ancient Egyptians themselves were saying, they were going back thousands of years further that what traditional Egyptology dismisses as pure mythology. They believed that they had dynasties and they tracked those and they're way further in back. Now, what's interesting in I'm not going to tell all of the book of Graham Hancock, all of this excellent book, Magicians of the God, but basically it is linking with some other studies, for example, the studies of John Anthony West, or perhaps other archaeologists and geologists that have studied the phenomenon, which is what is called the Younger Dryas, which says that roughly 10,000 BC, so 12,000 and something years ago, there must have been a comet that struck the Earth around probably in the ice cap of North America, and some of the debris that were thrown of that comet actually caused what I think is called the Virginia Flats on the coast of Virginia, so some sort of very shallow craters, and obviously that impact most probably, and there's a very big chapter that I think is fascinating that explains how the hit on the ice cap and the melting of that ice cap created some sort of lakes of melted water, and the ice dams that suddenly could not hold these lakes broke, and this could have created some massive valleys and some massive drainage canyons across parts of Oregon and Washington states in the U.S. and even perhaps the Great Lakes. And there's even a theory that could say that perhaps the English Channel between England and the coast of France is in fact some sort of canyon created at melting glaciers in North Europe. And if that happened 12,000 years ago, approximately 12,800 years ago, well, then any civilization that was living, and remember that the sea level was much lower, probably hundreds of feet lower than it is today, well, suddenly all this water flowing into the oceans must have risen the ocean's level and created catastrophic floodings across any civilization that was probably coastal, because it's much better for a civilization to be on a coastline than inland. So it could well be possible that at those times, what we call Atlantis or what we call Mu or other civilizations that were probably in Indonesia, off the coast of Japan, off the coast of Sicily, and certainly off the coast of the Canary Islands, off Morocco, or even in the Caribbean, if there was a global, very advanced civilization, such disaster completely crushes it. And probably the survivors of that civilization are the people who, some in Central America, some in Egypt, took the knowledge they had, the skills they had, and as survivors, probably mixed with the local populations. And of course, for example, in Central Europe, there were very, crude tribes that we call the Cro-Magnon. But certainly in the Middle East, that explained that suddenly, because it's more fertile and because probably the environment is better for agriculture, suddenly these people who come from that catastrophe or survive from that catastrophe can spark and spawn new civilizations. And obviously, some of them have some skills, and that could be the ones that, for example, created and started Egypt, or perhaps Egypt was a colony of that civilization. And that is difficult to know. And actually, this is something I would love to interview Graham Hancock on what makes civilizations survive or not. Because I think that cataclysmic catastrophes explain a lot about civilization collapsing, but the resilience of that civilization and its ability to reorganize and withstand such a catastrophe can vary according to its social construct, according to its mindset, and according to its own myth. And I'd be very, very curious to see Graham Hancock's ideas on what are the social constructs and mindsets of such a civilization, and what could be the social constructs and the mindset of a civilization like ours, or at least that what our civilization should have as mindset and social construct to survive what I think is coming, which is another big catastrophe, which is probably not cataclysmic in terms of natural causes, but certainly cataclysmic in terms of man-made causes. And of course, this could be very interesting. So Graham Hancock, if you read this, if you listen to this, I would love to interview you. We've been in contact before, but I'd love to do that again. So actually, I would love to show you the book, but actually a friend of mine has it. So I show you the one before. Actually, I have all of them. But excellent books by Graham Hancock. I put the image here. Magician of the God, which you can find anywhere. And a very, very fascinating book. A must read for anyone who's like me, is thinking about how civilization can survive in the future. Try to understand how a big civilization, which for me is almost a certainty, disappeared 12,000 years ago, and its survivors built our world, starting from the Middle East and in other places. So a must read, and I encourage you to read that book. Take care and prepare yourselves.